grab yourself a coffee and enjoy the story. Laurel Calloway couldn't sleep. The digital clock on her nightstand glowed 3:27 in the morning, casting an eerie blue light across the bedroom. She turned to look at Evander, her husband of nearly 10 years, sleeping peacefully beside her. His chest rose and fell with each breath, completely unaware of the storm raging inside her. How could he sleep so soundly when her entire world was crumbling? Just 6 hours earlier, she had been the happiest woman alive. Their 10th anniversary was approaching in 3 weeks, and Laurel had been secretly planning a surprise vow renewal ceremony. Nothing extravagant, just an intimate gathering at the lake house where they'd first met, surrounded by their closest friends and family. She had already contacted the caterer, reserved the venue, and even found the perfect dress, a sleek, champagne-colored gown that made her feel beautiful in a way she hadn't in years. The irony wasn't lost on her. While she'd been planning to renew their commitment, Evander had apparently been planning their separation. The evidence lay hidden in her nightstand drawer now, a manila envelope containing divorce papers with his signature dated almost exactly 1 year ago. The discovery had been purely accidental. She'd been searching for their wedding album in the storage closet, hoping to recreate some of their original vows, when the envelope had slipped from between 2 photo boxes. At first, Laurel hadn't understood what she was looking at. Legal documents weren't unusual in their home. Evander's job as a financial consultant meant paperwork was a constant presence. But then she'd seen the words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage," printed across the top, and her hands had begun to shake so violently that she'd dropped the entire stack of papers. "Why?" she whispered now, studying her husband's face in the dim light. After 10 years together, she thought she knew every line and curve of his features. The tiny scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood accident, the slight asymmetry of his lips that became more pronounced when he smiled, the crow's feet around his eyes that had deepened over the years. But suddenly, he was a stranger to her. The most confusing part was that nothing in their marriage had indicated trouble. They still had dinner together most nights, discussing their days and making each other laugh. They still held hands during movies and made love several times a month, not with the frantic passion of their early days, perhaps, but with a comfortable intimacy that Laurel had always found reassuring. Just last weekend, they'd spent Sunday morning lingering over coffee on their back porch, planning a trip to Maine for the summer. Had it all been a lie? A performance he maintained while secretly planning his exit? Laurel slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb the mattress. She padded barefoot to the kitchen, her mind racing with possibilities. Perhaps he'd filed the papers during their rough patch last year, the 3 months when Evander had been consumed with a major project at work, coming home late and distracted. But they'd worked through that. He'd made changes, declined the next big assignment, and things had returned to normal. Better than normal, even. Or had they? Laurel poured herself a glass of water, her throat suddenly parched. Had the improvement in their marriage been genuine? Or had he simply been biding his time? And why keep signed divorce papers but never file them? It made no sense. A notification sound broke the silence, and Laurel jumped, nearly dropping her glass. Evander's phone, left charging on the kitchen counter, lit up with a message. She normally wouldn't look. They'd always respected each other's privacy, but tonight all rules seemed suspended. The message preview showed on the lock screen. "Today was amazing. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same time?" The sender was someone named Vesper. Laurel felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. She set her glass down carefully, afraid her trembling hands would betray her. Vesper. The name was unfamiliar, but the tone of the message was not. Intimate. Familiar. The kind of message you send to someone you're comfortable with, someone you're sleeping with. She wanted to grab the phone, unlock it, and read every message this Vesper had ever sent. But Evander's phone was fingerprint protected, and besides, did she really need to see more? Wasn't the divorce paperwork combined with this late-night message enough evidence? Memories began reshuffling themselves in her mind, taking on new meaning. Evander's recent business trips that seemed to run longer than usual. The new cologne he'd started wearing 6 months ago. The gym membership he'd actually been using consistently, coming home with damp hair and flushed cheeks. His sudden interest in his appearance, new clothes, a more stylish haircut, even whitening his teeth. She'd been thrilled by these changes, interpreting them as signs that he was taking better care of himself. Now she recognized them for what they were. The classic signs of a man involved with someone new. Laurel made her way back to the bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. She stood in the doorway, watching Evander sleep. Tomorrow, she would confront him. She would demand answers about the divorce papers and about Vesper. She would ask him why he'd chosen to break her heart while simultaneously planning a future with her. But tonight, she just needed to survive until morning. She slipped back into bed, keeping to her edge of the mattress. As if sensing her presence, Evander rolled toward her in his sleep, his arm reaching for her as it had done thousands of nights before. Laurel stiffened, fighting the urge to push him away. "Love you," he murmured, still mostly asleep. A tear slid down her cheek. How dare he? How dare he speak of love while betraying her so completely? Morning came too quickly, and not quickly enough. Laurel had dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every small sound, her mind spinning with scenarios and questions. By the time sunlight filtered through their bedroom curtains, she had moved from shock to anger. She deserved answers, and she would get them today. She got up first, showered, and dressed with unusual care, as if proper attire might somehow protect her from the conversation ahead. She applied makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes, blow-dried her hair, and even put on the pearl earrings Evander had given her for their 5th anniversary. Armor of a sort. In the kitchen, she made coffee and toast, going through the motions of a normal morning. When Evander finally emerged, sleepy-eyed and rumpled in his pajamas, Laurel steeled herself. "Morning," he said, reaching for the coffee pot. "You're up early." "We need to talk," Laurel said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. Something in her tone must have alerted him, because he turned to face her fully, coffee forgotten. "What's wrong?" Laurel reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded divorce petition. She placed it on the kitchen island between them, watching his face carefully. "I found this yesterday." Evander's expression changed so rapidly that Laurel might have missed it if she hadn't been studying him so intently. Shock, fear, and then, most painfully, guilt. "Laurel," he began, but she cut him off. "And then there's Vesper," she said, the name bitter on her tongue, "who sends you messages about how amazing your time together was, who can't wait to see you again today." His face paled. "You saw that message? It came in while you were sleeping. Your phone was on the counter." Evander ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd always found endearing. Now it just made her want to scream. "This isn't what you think," he said finally. Laurel gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "That's exactly what someone would say when it's precisely what I think. Don't insult me by lying, Evander. Not now." He moved toward her, but she stepped back, maintaining the distance between them. He stopped, looking lost and much older than his 40 years. "You're right," he said quietly. "I owe you the truth, but I swear to you, I'm not having an affair. Vesper is my doctor." Of all the explanations Laurel had prepared herself for, this wasn't one of them. "Your doctor? You expect me to believe that your doctor texts you at 11 o'clock at night about how amazing your day together was?" "Yes," he said, holding her gaze steadily. "Because Dr. Vesper Hawthorne is the oncologist who's been treating my pancreatic cancer for the past 18 months. The world seemed to tilt beneath Laurel's feet. "What? I have cancer, Laurel. Or I did. Yesterday was my final treatment session, and my latest scans show no evidence of disease." That's what Vesper, Dr. Hawthorne, was referring to. "It was an amazing day. A miracle day, really. Laurel gripped the edge of the counter, her legs suddenly unsteady. You don't have cancer. You've never been sick. I would have known. Evander's eyes filled with tears. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want to put you through that, so I hid it from you. And those papers, he nodded toward the divorce petition, were part of how I did it. For one long, suspended moment, Laurel couldn't speak. Her mind struggled to process what she was hearing. Cancer, divorce papers, secrets. It was too much. You're lying, she whispered finally. This is just another lie to cover the first one. Evander shook his head slowly. I wish I were lying, Laurel. God, I wish this whole thing had been an affair. That would have been simpler, in a way. He moved to the living room, retrieving his laptop bag from beside the couch. From a hidden compartment, he pulled out a thick folder and handed it to her. Here's everything. My diagnosis, treatment plans, medical bills, scan results, all of it. With shaking hands, Laurel opened the folder. Inside were dozens of medical documents, all bearing Evander's name. CT scan reports, blood test results, treatment protocols for aggressive chemotherapy, and most recently, a report dated just 3 days ago showing complete metabolic response with no evidence of disease. The room seemed to spin around her. She looked up at her husband, seeing him now with new eyes. The weight loss she'd attributed to his gym routine, the fatigue she'd blamed on work stress, the times he'd been traveling for business that had aligned perfectly with the treatment dates in these records. Why? She managed, her voice breaking on the single word. Why would you hide this from me? Why would you face cancer alone, rather than let me help you? Evander's shoulders sagged. That's where the divorce papers come in. When I was diagnosed, the prognosis was, it wasn't good, Laurel. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer has a 5-year survival rate of less than 10%, and the treatment options were all experimental, expensive, and not covered by insurance. He took a deep breath. I knew that if I died, you'd be left with crushing medical debt. But if we were divorced, the debt would be solely mine. You'd keep the house, your retirement accounts, everything we'd built together. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving you both grieving and financially ruined. Laurel sank into a kitchen chair, the medical folder clutched against her chest. So, you signed divorce papers? I had them drawn up and signed them, yes, but I never filed them. I couldn't bring myself to actually go through with it unless absolutely necessary. I kept hoping for a miracle. And then, his voice caught. And then I got one. Dr. Hawthorne got me into an experimental trial, and I started responding to the treatment. Month by month, scan by scan, the cancer retreated. But I was afraid to hope, afraid to tell you until I was sure. I didn't want to put you through the roller coaster of thinking I was cured only to have the cancer return. Laurel closed her eyes, overwhelmed. Every assumption she'd made, every scenario she'd imagined through her sleepless night, had been wrong. Evander hadn't been pulling away from her. He'd been trying, in his misguided way, to protect her. You should have told me, she said finally, opening her eyes to look at him. I'm your wife, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. Those weren't just words to me, Evander. I know, he whispered. I was wrong. But I was so scared, Laurel. Not just of dying, but of what it would do to you. Watching someone you love suffer through cancer treatment, it changes you. I didn't want to change us. A profound exhaustion settled over Laurel, replacing the adrenaline that had kept her going through the night. She stood up slowly. I need time to process this, she said. I understand why you thought you were protecting me, but you lied to me, Evander. For 1.5 years, you've been living a double life. That's not something I can just get over in one morning. He nodded, tears streaming down his face now. I understand. Whatever you need, however long it takes, I'll be here. Laurel moved past him toward the bedroom, needing space to think. But at the doorway, she paused and turned back. Are you really cancer-free? She asked, her voice small. For For the first time that morning, Evander smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. According to yesterday's scan, yes. Dr. Hawthorne says she's never seen a response like mine. He's calling it a complete remission. Despite everything, Laurel felt a flutter of hope in her chest. That's good news. The best news. It is, he agreed. And I was planning to tell you everything next week. I have one final follow-up appointment on Monday, and if that confirms the results, I was going to tell you the whole truth. I even made dinner reservations at Giovanni's, where we had our first date. Laurel shook her head, a hysterical laugh bubbling up. And I was planning to surprise you with a vow renewal ceremony for our anniversary. They stared at each other across the room, the irony of their separate secrets hanging in the air between them. I'm still angry, Laurel said finally, and hurt, and confused, but I'm also grateful that you're okay, that we have a chance to work through this. Evander nodded, wiping his eyes. I'll spend the rest of our lives making this up to you, if you'll let me. Laurel didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she turned and continued to the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. She sank onto the bed, her mind reeling with everything she'd learned. Her husband didn't have a lover. He had cancer. And now, apparently, he didn't. It was too much to process all at once. She needed time, space, perspective. She glanced at her nightstand, where the anniversary surprise plans were still hidden. In the midst of all this chaos and pain, one thing remained clear. Whatever happened next, their marriage would never be the same again. Whether that meant stronger or broken beyond repair, only time would tell. 3 days passed in a fog of confusion and strained silence. Laurel and Evander moved around each other carefully, like dancers afraid of stepping on each other's toes. They slept in the same bed, but maintained a careful distance. They ate meals together, but focused on their plates rather than conversation. At night, Laurel would lie awake, listening to Evander's breathing, wondering how she had missed the signs of his illness for so long. On the 4th morning, Laurel woke to find Evander's side of the bed empty. A note on his pillow read, "Final follow-up appointment with Dr. Hawthorne. Should be home by noon. We need to talk. I love you." Laurel traced her finger over the words, "I love you," torn between lingering anger and overwhelming relief that he was alive and, apparently, cancer-free. She still hadn't fully processed the reality of his diagnosis and recovery. It felt like a story happening to someone else, not her own life. She called in sick to the advertising agency where she worked as a creative director, unable to face the prospect of pretending everything was normal for 8 hours. Instead, she found herself drawn to the thick medical folder that Evander had given her, which she'd barely looked at since their confrontation. At the kitchen table, with a cup of strong coffee beside her, Laurel began to methodically review every document. The initial diagnosis report from Dr. Thaddeus Fairchild was dated 18 months ago. Stage 4 pancreatic adenocarcinoma, with metastasis to the liver. Prognosis poor. Recommend palliative care discussion and consideration of experimental protocols. If patient desires, aggressive treatment. Laurel's hand trembled as she read the clinical description of what should have been a death sentence. The 5-year survival rate for stage 4 pancreatic cancer was less than 5%. According to these documents, Evander had been told he likely had months, not years, to live. Next came insurance denial letters for experimental treatments, followed by financial documents showing how Evander had liquidated his personal retirement account and taken a second mortgage on a small investment property she'd forgotten they owned, all without touching their joint accounts or their home. Treatment records showed weekly chemotherapy sessions that aligned perfectly with his business trips to Boston. Blood test results tracked the brutal toll the treatments had taken on his body. CT scan reports documented the cancer's stubborn persistence through the first 3 treatment protocols. Then, 12 months ago, a new name appeared in the records, Dr. Vesper Hawthorne. oncologist specializing in pancreatic cancer and immunotherapy. A new treatment plan was outlined, an experimental approach combining targeted therapy with an immunotherapy regimen that had shown promise in clinical trials. And miraculously, 3 months into Dr. Hawthorne's treatment, the first signs of improvement appeared. 30% reduction in tumor burden, one report noted. Then, 6 months ago, significant metabolic response, major reduction in tumor markers. And finally, the most recent scan from 3 days ago, complete metabolic response, no evidence of disease. Continue maintenance therapy for 6 months as precaution. Laurel set down the last report, her coffee long cold and forgotten. Outside, rain had begun to fall, streaking the kitchen windows and casting the room in a gray light that matched her mood. The evidence before her was undeniable. While she had been going about her normal life, working, socializing, planning for their future, Evander had been fighting for his life in secret. She tried to recall those early months after his diagnosis. What had she missed? There had been the weight loss, which he'd attributed to a new diet and exercise regimen. The fatigue, which he'd blamed on work stress. The occasional bouts of nausea that he'd dismissed as food poisoning or stomach bugs. But there must have been more. No one underwent chemotherapy without visible side effects. How had he hidden it so completely? As if answering her unspoken question, Laurel found a smaller envelope tucked at the back of the folder. Inside were receipts for a short-term rental apartment in Boston, just blocks from the hospital where he'd received treatment. Hotel reservations for the days immediately following chemo sessions. Prescriptions for anti-nausea medications and steroids filled at a pharmacy they never used. He had created an entire parallel life centered around his cancer treatment, all to shield her from the truth. The sound of the front door opening startled Laurel from her thoughts. She looked up to see Evander standing in the kitchen doorway, rain dripping from his coat. Their eyes met over the scattered medical documents. "How was your appointment?" she asked, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. Evander removed his wet coat and hung it carefully by the door before answering. "Good. The blood work confirmed the scan results. Dr. Hawthorne says I'm officially in complete remission." "That's wonderful," Laurel said, and meant it, despite the complicated emotions swirling within her. Evander gestured to the papers spread across the table. "You've been reading." "I needed to understand," she replied simply. He nodded, then pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Ask me anything. No more secrets." Laurel gathered the papers into a neat stack, needing to organize something when her emotions felt so chaotic. "How did you hide the symptoms? The side effects from chemotherapy?" "I scheduled treatments for Friday afternoons, then stayed in Boston through the worst of it. By Monday I could manage the remaining symptoms with medication." He ran a hand through his damp hair. "The weight loss was harder to explain, so I pretended to be on a health kick. The fatigue I blamed on work." "And the pain?" Laurel asked softly. Evander's eyes filled with tears. "I took pain medication when you weren't around. Sometimes I'd say I had a headache or back pain from sitting at my desk too long, so you wouldn't question why I was taking Tylenol." Laurel thought about the nights he'd gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion from work. The mornings he'd already be up and dressed before she woke. The weekends he'd encouraged her to visit her sister or meet friends, saying he had work to catch up on. "Did anyone know? Your parents? Your brother?" Evander shook his head. "No one. I couldn't risk you finding out from someone else. The only people who knew were my doctors and my assistant at work, who helped cover for my absences. And Dr. Hawthorne?" Laurel couldn't keep a hint of jealousy from her voice, remembering the familiar tone of the text message. "Dr. Hawthorne knows only that I chose not to tell my family about my diagnosis. She doesn't know the details of why." He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching Laurel's. "He's just my doctor, Laurel. A brilliant doctor who saved my life, but nothing more than that." Laurel nodded, somewhat reassured, but still struggling to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the one sitting before her. the one who had maintained such an elaborate deception for so long. "Why the divorce papers?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since his revelation. "Why not just update your will or set up a trust? There were other ways to protect me financially." Evander sighed deeply. The medical bills were already over $1 million, with more treatments ahead. Insurance covered the standard protocols, but the experimental treatments, the ones that actually worked, were all out of pocket. I spoke to 3 different lawyers. They all said the same thing. If I died while we were married, my medical debt would become your responsibility in most scenarios. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I couldn't bear the thought of leaving you not only grieving, but also financially devastated. The divorce papers were a last resort, a way to legally separate our finances while I underwent treatments that might bankrupt me, but could also save my life." "But you never filed them," Laurel pointed out. "I kept hoping I wouldn't need to. Every scan, I'd wait for good news that would mean I could tear up those papers." His voice broke. "And when I finally got that news, when Dr. Hawthorne told me the treatment was working, I was afraid to believe it, afraid to hope. Pancreatic cancer has a high recurrence rate, especially in the first year. I wanted to be absolutely certain before I told you anything." Laurel absorbed this, trying to see the situation from his perspective. Faced with a terminal diagnosis, overwhelming medical debt, and the desire to protect her, perhaps his decisions made a certain kind of sense. Misguided, deeply flawed sense, but sense nonetheless. "I understand why you thought you were protecting me," she said finally. "But Evander, don't you see how much worse this secrecy was? If you had died suddenly, I would have been blindsided, not just by grief, but by the discovery that you had been sick all along and never told me, that you'd lied to me every day for months. How would I ever have recovered from that kind of betrayal?" Evander's face crumpled. "I didn't think about it that way. I was so focused on sparing you from watching me suffer, from the burden of caregiving, from the financial fallout. I didn't consider the cost of the deception itself. And what about us? Our marriage?" Laurel pressed. "We promised to face everything together. You took that choice away from me. You decided, unilaterally, that I couldn't handle this. It wasn't that I thought you couldn't handle it," Evander protested. "I knew you could. You're the strongest person I know. I didn't want cancer to define the last months we had together. If they were to be our last months, I wanted us to have normal days, normal memories, not hospital rooms and chemo appointments, and watching me waste away." Laurel stood abruptly, needing to move. She paced the kitchen, arms wrapped around herself. "That wasn't your decision to make alone. Marriage is a partnership, Evander. We face the hard things together. That's the whole point." "You're right," he said quietly. "I was wrong, completely wrong, and I'm so sorry." The sincerity in his voice made Laurel pause her pacing. She turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time in days. Beneath the familiar features was a weariness she had attributed to work stress, but now recognized as something deeper, the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting for his life while carrying the additional burden of an enormous secret. "I need to ask you something," she said, returning to the table but remaining standing. "And I need the absolute truth." Evander nodded. "Anything. If the treatment hadn't worked, if the cancer had progressed, would you have told me before? Before the end?" Pain flashed across his face. "I told myself I would, that I'd find the right moment, when it was clear nothing more could be done. But honestly, I don't know. I was so determined to protect you from this that I might have maintained the lie until it was too late." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And that would have been unforgivable." His honesty, painful as it was, gave Laurel a strange sense of relief. At least now they were dealing in truths, not comforting fictions. "One more question," she said. "The experimental treatment with Dr. Hawthorne, the one that worked, how did you afford it if insurance wouldn't cover it?" Evander hesitated, then replied, I sold my shares in the consulting firm. Laurel stared at him in shock. Your partnership? But that was your security, your retirement plan. It was worth it, he said simply. I would have sold everything I owned for a chance to stay alive, to stay with you. The weight of what he had sacrificed, not just financially, but emotionally, carrying this burden alone, hit Laurel with unexpected force. Whatever mistakes he had made in how he handled his illness, his motivation had always been love. She sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. I'm still angry with you, she said. I don't know how to get past this overnight. I don't expect you to, Evander replied. I know I've broken your trust. I hope we can find a way forward, together. Laurel was silent for a long moment, considering. Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight filtered through the kitchen window. She thought about the vow renewal she had been planning, her vision of them standing together, recommitting to a marriage she had believed was solid and true. Now she knew their foundation had been built partly on deception, no matter how well-intentioned. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. I need time. Evander nodded, accepting this. I understand. For what it's worth, I was planning to tell you everything after today's appointment. I even made reservations at Giovanni's for tonight. I hoped we could celebrate the good news together once you knew the whole truth. Laurel remembered the anniversary surprise she had been planning, how she'd imagined Evander's face lighting up with joy at the gesture. Now, both their surprises lay in ruins, overtaken by harder truths. I think we need some space, she said finally. Not separation, just space to process everything. I'm going to stay with Maeve for a few days. Though she saw the pain in his eyes, Evander nodded. Whatever you need. Laurel stood and moved toward the bedroom to pack a bag, but paused in the doorway. I'm glad you're going to be okay, she said softly. Whatever happens with us, I need you to know that. I would never wish for any other outcome. Thank you, Evander whispered. As Laurel packed a small suitcase, her hands moved automatically, while her mind raced with contradictory emotions. Anger at his deception, relief at his recovery, fear for their future, and beneath it all, a stubborn, persistent love that refused to be extinguished, even by this betrayal. She didn't know if they could rebuild what his secrecy had damaged. But as she zipped her suitcase closed, she realized that despite everything, she wanted to try. When she emerged from the bedroom, Evander was still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of medical documents that chronicled his private battle. I'll call you, she said, picking up her car keys. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but hopeful. I'll be here. As Laurel drove to Maeve's apartment across town, she felt as if she were suspended between two lives, the one she had thought she was living, and the one that had been unfolding without her knowledge. Somewhere in between, perhaps, lay a path forward. Maeve Hollister's guest bedroom became Laurel's sanctuary for the next week. By day, she went through the motions at work, focusing on client presentations and creative briefs with an intensity that kept intrusive thoughts at bay. By night, she lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, replaying memories of her marriage through the new lens of Evander's illness. He called again, Maeve said, appearing in the doorway with a mug of chamomile tea. It was just past 10 in the evening, and Laurel had been staring at the same page of a novel for 20 minutes without absorbing a single word. Laurel accepted the tea with a grateful smile. What did he say? Just asked how you were doing, and if you needed anything. Maeve perched on the edge of the bed, studying her friend's face. He sounds miserable, Laure. He lied to me for a year and a half, Laurel reminded her, though the edge had gone out of her voice after days of repeating the same argument. I know, Maeve said softly, and that was wrong. But he did it because he was trying to protect you. By taking away my choice? Laurel shook her head. That's not protection. That's control. Maeve was silent for a moment, considering. When my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, she didn't tell any of us for the first 3 months. Not even Dad. Laurel looked up in surprise. I didn't know that. She said she needed time to come to terms with it herself before she could handle our reactions. Maeve twisted a strand of her dark hair around her finger, a nervous habit from childhood. Dad was furious when he found out, but later he told me he understood. People facing mortality do strange things sometimes. Laurel sipped her tea, letting the warmth spread through her chest. Did I ever tell you about the anniversary surprise I was planning when I found those divorce papers? Maeve shook her head. A vow renewal ceremony. At the lake house, where we first met. Laurel gave a hollow laugh. Ironic, isn't it? I was planning to celebrate our commitment, while discovering he'd been lying to me the entire time. Not the entire time, Maeve corrected gently. From what you've told me, he was a good husband for 8.5 years before his diagnosis. And even during his illness, he was trying, in his misguided way, to be a good husband by protecting you. Laurel set her mug down on the nightstand. That's the problem, Maeve. I keep vacillating between feeling betrayed and understanding his motivations, between fury and forgiveness. I don't know which is the right response. Maybe both are, Maeve suggested. Maybe you can understand why he did what he did and still be hurt by it. Maybe forgiveness doesn't mean you weren't wronged. The wisdom in her friend's words resonated, but Laurel still felt adrift. I don't know how to move forward. How do I trust him again? Maeve stood up, straightening the quilt at the foot of the bed. I can't answer that for you, but I do know that second chances don't come along often. Most people would give anything for the chance to rebuild what's broken. After Maeve left, Laurel reached for her phone. She had been checking it compulsively all week, reading and rereading Evander's daily texts. They were always brief, respectful of her need for space. Thinking of you. Hope you're doing okay. I miss you. Never pushing for a response, never demanding her forgiveness. Tonight, there was a new message. Dr. Hawthorne confirmed today that I can start reducing some medications. Another step forward. Hope you're well. Laurel's finger hovered over the screen. She hadn't replied to any of his messages yet, uncertain what to say. But tonight, something compelled her to respond. I'm glad to hear that, she typed, then added, I'm doing okay. Staying with Maeve is helping me think. His response came almost immediately. Good. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Laurel set the phone down, a complicated blend of emotions stirring within her. Beneath the hurt and betrayal, there was still love, stubborn, resilient love that refused to be extinguished, despite everything. The next morning, Laurel found herself driving to their house instead of to work. She had called in sick, needing the day to sort through her thoughts. She wasn't planning to see Evander. She knew he would be at work, but she wanted to be in their space, to feel the familiar comfort of home, while she considered their future. The house was quiet when she let herself in. Everything looked exactly as she had left it, yet somehow different, as if the revelation of Evander's illness had altered the very fabric of their shared spaces. She wandered from room to room, seeing evidence of their life together with new eyes. In Evander's home office, she found a stack of medical journals on pancreatic cancer, hidden behind business periodicals on his bookshelf. In the bathroom medicine cabinet, behind bottles of vitamins, she discovered anti-nausea medication prescribed by Dr. Hawthorne. In the nightstand on his side of the bed, she found a journal filled with entries tracking his symptoms, medication side effects, and treatment responses. Everything had been hiding in plain sight, she realized. He hadn't just lied with his words, but had created an elaborate system of concealment throughout their home. In the kitchen, Laurel made herself a cup of coffee and sat at the table where they had shared thousands of meals. She tried to imagine what it had been like for Evander, sitting across from her night after night, carrying the weight of his diagnosis alone. How exhausting it must have been to maintain the charade, to protect her from a truth that was slowly killing him. The sound of a key in the front door startled her from her thoughts. A moment later, Evander appeared in the kitchen doorway, freezing when he saw her. "Laurel," he said, clearly surprised. "I didn't expect. I thought you'd be at work." she replied, equally startled by his presence. Half day, he explained. Physical therapy appointment. At her questioning look, he added, for neuropathy. It's a side effect from the chemotherapy. Nerve damage in my hands and feet. Laurel hadn't known about this particular side effect. She glanced down at his hands, noticing for the first time the slight tremor in his right fingers. Does it hurt? Sometimes, he admitted. The therapy helps. He hesitated, hovering in the doorway as if unsure whether to enter his own kitchen. I can go, if you need space. No, Laurel said, surprising herself. Stay. I think we should talk. Evander moved cautiously to the table, taking the seat across from her. The same positions they had occupied during their confrontation a week ago. How are you? He asked, his voice soft with concern. Processing, Laurel answered honestly. I've been looking around the house, finding all the places you hid evidence of your illness. The medication in the bathroom, the medical journals in your office, your symptom journal. She met his eyes directly. You were very thorough. Evander looked down at his hands. I was terrified of slipping up, of causing you pain. Instead, you just delayed it, Laurel observed, but without the anger that would have colored her words a week ago. I know, he acknowledged. I thought I was making the right choice at the time, but I see now how wrong I was. They sat in silence for a moment, the afternoon sunlight casting patterns on the kitchen table between them. I found something else too, Laurel said finally. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small black box. This was in your sock drawer. Evander's eyes widened in recognition. You weren't supposed to find that yet. Laurel opened the box to reveal a platinum band set with small diamonds, a perfect match to her wedding ring. An anniversary gift? He nodded. 10 years felt significant, especially when I wasn't sure I'd live to see it. Laurel closed the box gently and set it on the table. I had a surprise planned too. A vow renewal ceremony at the lake house. A sad smile touched Evander's lips. That would have been perfect. Would have been, Laurel repeated, the past tense hanging heavily between them. Evander reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. Laurel, I know I've broken your trust. I know forgiveness can't be rushed or demanded, but I want you to know that if you're willing to try, I will spend every day working to rebuild what my deception damaged. Laurel studied his face, the face she had loved for more than a decade, through joy and sorrow, success and setback, the face that had kept such a monumental secret from her. Why did you really come home early today? She asked suddenly, intuition telling her there was more to the story. Evander hesitated, then admitted, I've been coming home during lunch breaks to check the answering machine. I was afraid you might call the house instead of my cell, and I didn't want to miss it. The simple confession, this small, hopeful act of a man desperate not to miss any chance at reconciliation, touched something deep inside Laurel. I'm still angry, she said softly. I'm still hurt. But Evander, I still love you too. That hasn't changed. His eyes filled with tears. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, she agreed. But love isn't about what we deserve. It's about what we choose. For the first time in days, Laurel reached across the table and took his hand in hers. The slight tremor in his fingers was evident against her palm, tangible proof of what his body had endured, while his words had hidden the truth. Tell me about the neuropathy, she said. Tell me everything I've missed. No more secrets. And so he did. For the next 3 hours, they sat at the kitchen table while Evander detailed every aspect of his diagnosis, treatment, and recovery. He described the bone-deep fatigue after chemotherapy sessions, the nausea that would leave him curled on a hotel bathroom floor, the fear that woke him in the middle of the night. He told her about the moments of despair when treatment after treatment failed, and the cautious hope when Dr. Hawthorne's experimental protocol began to show results. He explained how he had coordinated his treatment schedule around their life, ensuring he would be at his best when they were together. Laurel listened, asking questions, absorbing the reality of what her husband had experienced alone. With each revelation, her anger gradually transformed. not disappearing, but evolving into something more complex. A sadness for what they had lost, a determination that whatever came next, they would face it together. As afternoon faded into evening, Evander finally fell silent, his story told in full. "Thank you," Laurel said, "for telling me everything now." "I should have told you from the beginning," he replied, regret heavy in his voice. Laurel nodded, acknowledging the truth of his words. "Yes, you should have, but we can't change the past. We can only decide what happens next." "What do you want to happen next?" Evander asked, the question gentle, patient. Laurel took a deep breath. "I want to come home," she said. "Not because everything is fixed or forgotten, but because I can't figure out how to move forward if we're apart." Relief washed over Evander's face. "Really? Really?" she confirmed. "We have a lot of work to do, rebuilding trust and communication. But I want to try." "I want that too," he said fervently. "More than anything." As they sat in their kitchen, hands still joined across the table, Laurel felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't expected to find so soon. Hope. Not the naive hope of before, but something more tenuous and precious. Hope born from the ashes of betrayal. Hope that acknowledged the fragility of trust and the work required to restore it. Outside, the first stars of evening appeared in the deepening blue sky. Inside, two people who had lost their way began the delicate process of finding each other again. "I'll get my things from Maeve's tomorrow," Laurel said. Evander squeezed her hand gently. "Welcome home." Those two simple words carried the weight of everything they had lost, and everything they might still reclaim. Laurel squeezed back, accepting both the welcome and the challenge it represented. They had weathered a storm neither of them had expected. Now came the slow, careful work of rebuilding what the tempest had damaged. One truth, one day, one moment of trust at a time. 2 weeks after Laurel's return home, life had settled into a new routine, one built on honesty rather than protection. Each morning, Evander took his medications in front of her rather than hiding them away. Each evening, they reviewed his recovery progress together, tracking improvements and setbacks in a shared journal. The conversations weren't always easy, but they were real. Tonight, they sat on their back porch, enjoying the mild spring evening. Laurel wrapped her hands around a mug of herbal tea, watching as twilight settled over their garden. Evander had been quiet all day, more withdrawn than usual. "What's on your mind?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Evander looked up from the book he'd been pretending to read for the past half hour. "I have an appointment with Dr. Hawthorne tomorrow. 3-month follow-up scan." Laurel felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. Though his last several checkups had shown continued remission, each new scan brought the fear that the cancer might have returned. "Do you want me to go with you? Would you?" Relief softened his features. "I didn't want to ask. I know you have that client presentation." "I'll reschedule," Laurel said firmly. "This is more important." Evander reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. "Thank you. I've done too many of these alone." The simple admission, his acknowledgement of what he had unnecessarily endured in solitude, touched Laurel deeply. In the weeks since her return home, she had come to understand that his deception had hurt him as much as it had hurt her, isolating him when he most needed connection. "What time is the appointment?" she asked. 9:30. They do the scan first. Then we meet with Dr. Hawthorne at 11 to review the results. Laurel squeezed his hand. "We'll face it together, whatever the results show." Evander's smile was tinged with sadness. "I wish I'd given you that choice from the beginning." "So do I," Laurel said honestly. They had agreed not to pretend the betrayal hadn't happened or hadn't mattered. But we're here now. That night, as they prepared for bed, Laurel watched Evander move around their bedroom. He still favored his left side slightly, another lingering effect of the neuropathy. But otherwise, he looked healthy. No one passing him on the street would guess that he had survived stage 4 cancer against overwhelming odds. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if the treatment hadn't worked?" she asked suddenly. Evander paused in the act of setting his alarm. All the time, he admitted, especially at night. Tell me, Laurel said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Evander sat beside her, close, but not touching. I think about how I would have kept deteriorating, how at some point I wouldn't have been able to hide it anymore. I think about how I would have had to tell you everything when I was already dying. His voice cracked. I think about the betrayal you would have felt, discovering not just that I was dying, but that I'd lied to you until the very end. Laurel closed her eyes, imagining this alternate reality. The grief would have been unimaginable, not just losing him, but losing her faith in their entire relationship. That would have been unforgivable, she said softly. I know, Evander whispered, and that's the guilt I live with every day, even though that scenario didn't happen. The knowledge that I was willing to risk that outcome. Laurel opened her eyes and looked at him. Why were you? Willing to risk it, I mean. Evander considered the question carefully. At first, it was simple denial. I thought if I didn't tell you, it wasn't really happening. Then, when I couldn't deny it anymore, I convinced myself I was protecting you. But the truth? He sighed deeply. The truth is that I was terrified, not just of dying, but of becoming a burden, of watching you become my caretaker instead of my wife, of seeing pity in your eyes instead of love. The raw honesty of his answer struck Laurel with unexpected force. For all the pain his deception had caused, she could understand this fundamental fear. The fear of being reduced to an illness, of having a disease redefine a relationship built over years. I wouldn't have pitied you, she said. I would have loved you through it, just as I'm loving you now, through the aftermath. Evander's eyes filled with tears. I know that now. I should have known it then. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what might have been hanging between them. We should get some sleep, Laurel said finally. Tomorrow will be a long day. As they settled into bed, Evander reached for her hand in the darkness. Whatever the scan shows tomorrow, he said quietly, I'm grateful for these past weeks, for the chance to begin making things right. Laurel squeezed his hand in response, unable to put into words the complex emotions his statement stirred within her. Gratitude for his survival, anger at his deception, fear of what tomorrow might bring, and beneath it all, a love that had proven more resilient than either of them had known. The hospital waiting room was busier than Laurel had expected. Patients of all ages filled the plastic chairs, some obviously ill, others showing no outward signs of the diseases they battled. Evander seemed to know the routine, checking in at the reception desk with practiced ease before leading Laurel to a quiet corner. It usually takes about 45 minutes for the scan, and then another hour for them to process the images before meeting with Dr. Hawthorne, he explained, his voice calm despite the tension evident in his shoulders. Laurel nodded, taking in her surroundings with new eyes. This had been Evander's world for months, a world of waiting rooms and medical procedures, of hope and fear balanced on the edge of a scan result, a world he had navigated entirely alone. Mr. Calloway? A technician in blue scrubs appeared in the doorway. We're ready for you. Evander stood, then hesitated, looking at Laurel. I'll be back soon. I'll be right here, she promised. As she watched him follow the technician through the double doors, Laurel felt a surge of protective love so fierce it took her breath away. Whatever lingering anger she harbored at his deception was overshadowed in this moment by the simple, primal hope that he would be okay. While Evander underwent his scan, Laurel flipped absently through outdated magazines, unable to focus on their contents. Around her, other patients and family members waited, some chatting quietly, others staring into space with the 1,000-yard gaze of those for whom waiting had become a way of life. First time here? Laurel looked up to find an elderly woman smiling gently at her from the neighboring chair. Her headscarf suggested she was undergoing chemotherapy herself. Yes, Laurel admitted. My husband is having a follow-up scan. The woman nodded knowingly. The waiting is the hardest part. I'm Ruth, by the way. Laurel, your husband. Is he recently diagnosed? Actually, he's in remission. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. His doctor is calling it a miracle case. Ruth's eyebrows rose. Stage 4 pancreatic? That is a miracle. He must have an excellent medical team. Dr. Hawthorne, Laurel said. She developed a specialized immunotherapy protocol that worked when nothing else did. Ah, Dr. Hawthorne, Ruth smiled. She's my oncologist, too. Brilliant woman. Saved my son's life 3 years ago, and now she's working on saving mine. The casual reference to Dr. Hawthorne, this woman who had become such a significant figure in their lives, yet whom Laurel had never met, brought home once again how much of Evander's cancer journey had happened in a parallel life to their marriage. What's she like? Laurel found herself asking. Dr. Hawthorne, I mean. Ruth considered the question. Intense, dedicated, not particularly warm, but you don't need warm when you're fighting cancer. You need someone who won't give up on you. And that's Vesper Hawthorne. She tilted her head, studying Laurel. You haven't met her? Laurel shook her head, unsure how to explain without revealing too much. I haven't been able to come to appointments until now. Something in Ruth's expression suggested she understood more than Laurel had said. Cancer changes everything, she observed. Not just for the patient, but for everyone who loves them. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the disease itself, but figuring out how to be with each other through it. Before Laurel could respond, the double doors opened and Evander emerged, looking tired but relieved. All done, he said, approaching them. Now we wait for Dr. Hawthorne. Ruth smiled at him. I was just telling your wife what a force of nature Dr. Hawthorne is. She's my oncologist, too. Evander's expression softened. She's the best. I wouldn't be here without her. Ruth patted the chair beside her. Sit, both of you. Tell me how you're doing with the neuropathy. I've been struggling with it myself. For the next 45 minutes, Laurel listened as Evander and Ruth discussed side effects, medications, and coping strategies with the easy camaraderie of fellow travelers on a difficult journey. It was a side of Evander she had never seen before. Open about his illness, knowledgeable about treatments, offering support, and receiving it in return. Evander Calloway? A nurse appeared in the waiting room. Dr. Hawthorne will see you now. Ruth squeezed Evander's hand. Good luck, young man, and remember what I said about the acupuncture for the neuropathy. It's helped me tremendously. Evander promised to look into it, and then he and Laurel followed the nurse down a long corridor to a consultation room. Dr. Hawthorne was already there, studying images on a computer screen with intense concentration. Laurel's first impression was of a woman wholly focused on her work, tall and slender, with short silver hair and striking features. Dr. Hawthorne radiated competence and intensity. She looked up as they entered, her serious expression immediately softening into a genuine smile. Evander, she greeted him warmly, and you must be Laurel. I'm very glad to finally meet you. Laurel shook the offered hand, feeling strangely nervous. This woman had saved her husband's life while Laurel had been completely unaware of the battle being waged. Thank you for everything you've done, Laurel said, the words inadequate but sincere. Dr. Hawthorne waved away the thanks. Your husband is one of our greatest success stories. Please, both of you, sit down. They took the chairs opposite her desk, Evander reaching for Laurel's hand, as they waited for the verdict on his latest scan. Dr. Hawthorne turned the computer screen so they could see the images. I'll cut to the chase, she said briskly. The scan is clear. No evidence of disease, just like the last one. Your blood work is excellent, and your tumor markers remain normal. Laurel felt Evander's hand tighten around hers, his relief palpable. What does that mean for his prognosis? Laurel asked, needing to hear the full truth. Dr. Hawthorne leaned back in her chair, considering. Pancreatic cancer is aggressive, with high recurrence rates, she said frankly. I never promise patients that they're cured, because that's not something I can guarantee. What I can say is that Evander has responded exceptionally well to treatment. His remission is complete, and has been stable for 6 months now. Each month of clean scans improves his long-term outlook significantly. She turned to Evander. I'm going to recommend we move to scans every 4 months instead of every 3. Continue with the maintenance medications for another 6 months. Then we'll reevaluate. The shift in schedule, a small step toward normalcy, away from the constant monitoring of active cancer treatment, felt momentous. Thank you, Dr. Hawthorne, Evander said, his voice thick with emotion. The doctor smiled, her professional demeanor softening slightly. You did the hard work, Evander. I just provided the tools. She glanced at Laurel. And I'm very glad you have support for this journey now. It makes a difference. The gentle reference to Evander's previous solitude sent a pang through Laurel's heart. How difficult it must have been for Dr. Hawthorne to treat a patient who insisted on facing cancer alone. After reviewing medication adjustments and scheduling the next appointment, Dr. Hawthorne shook both their hands. Take care of each other, she said, her gaze moving between them. That's the best medicine I can prescribe. As they left the hospital, stepping into the bright spring sunshine, Laurel felt a weight lift from her shoulders. One more clean scan. One more step away from the fear that had dominated their lives. How do you feel? She asked Evander as they walked to the parking garage. Relieved, he said. Grateful. He stopped walking and turned to face her. And so sorry that I didn't share this journey with you from the beginning. Seeing you with Dr. Hawthorne today, hearing you ask questions, feeling your support, I realize how much easier this could have been if I'd trusted in us. Laurel looked up at him. This man she had nearly lost without even knowing he was slipping away. We can't change the past, she said, but we can learn from it. No more secrets, no matter how painful the truth might be. Evander nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. No more secrets, he agreed. I promise. As they drove home, Laurel found herself thinking about their approaching anniversary, now just 1 week away. The vow renewal she had been planning seemed both inappropriate and more necessary than ever. They weren't the same people who had married 10 years ago. Their relationship had been fractured and was slowly healing, different but perhaps stronger for having been tested. Perhaps, Laurel thought, they needed new vows for this new chapter, vows that acknowledged both the pain they had survived and the commitment they were choosing to renew. She glanced at Evander, who was gazing out the passenger window with a peaceful expression she hadn't seen in months. Today was a good day, a day of clean scans and promising prognoses, a day to be grateful for second chances, not just at life, but at love. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, this moment of peace was enough. The morning of their 10th anniversary dawned clear and golden, sunlight streaming through the bedroom curtains in buttery ribbons. Laurel woke first, watching Evander sleep beside her. His features relaxed in a way they rarely were during waking hours. Even in remission, he carried the vigilance of someone who had stared death in the face, a subtle tension around his eyes, a readiness for bad news that never fully dissipated. But not this morning. This morning, he looked peaceful, younger somehow, as if the weight of the past 18 months had temporarily lifted from his shoulders. Laurel slipped quietly from bed, careful not to disturb him. Today was a day she had been planning for weeks. Not the elaborate vow renewal ceremony she had originally envisioned, but something more intimate, more fitting for where they now found themselves. A celebration not just of their decade together, but of the difficult journey that had almost torn them apart, and the commitment that had ultimately brought them back together. In the kitchen, she prepared coffee and checked her phone. A text from Maeve confirmed that everything was ready at the lake house, the small cabin where she and Evander had first met at a mutual friend's weekend gathering. Laurel had rented it for the day, a surprise she hoped would remind them both of simpler times and new beginnings. Something smells good. Laurel turned to find Evander in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, watching her with a soft smile. "Happy anniversary," she said, pouring him a cup of coffee and adding the precise amount of cream he preferred. "Happy anniversary." He accepted the mug, leaning in to kiss her gently. 10 years. Despite everything, we made it. Because of everything, Laurel corrected. Not despite it. Evander nodded, understanding her meaning. The crisis they had weathered had transformed their marriage, forcing a level of honesty and communication they might never have achieved otherwise. "I have something for you," he said, setting down his coffee and disappearing briefly into his office. He returned with a small wrapped package, which he placed on the kitchen island between them. Laurel unwrapped it carefully to reveal a leather-bound journal. Opening the cover, she found Evander's handwriting filling the first page. "Dear Laurel," it read, "this journal contains one entry for each day of the past year. Things I wish I had shared with you at the time. Moments of fear and hope, setbacks and progress. It's my attempt to retroactively include you in the journey I wrongly chose to take alone. I can't change the past, but I can share it with you now, with complete honesty. All my love, Evander." Tears welled in Laurel's eyes as she flipped through the pages, seeing dates and entries chronicling his illness, treatment, and internal struggles. The gift was perfect, an acknowledgement of what had been lost, an offering of transparency to rebuild what had been damaged. "Thank you," she whispered, closing the journal and holding it against her heart. "This means more than you know." "You don't have to read it all at once," Evander said. "Or ever, if it's too painful. But I wanted you to have the option, to know everything, if you choose to." Laurel nodded, too moved to speak. After a moment, she composed herself and smiled. "I have something for you too, but we need to go somewhere to get it." "Where?" Evander asked, intrigued. "It's a surprise. Pack an overnight bag, something comfortable for walking. We'll be back tomorrow." Evander raised an eyebrow but didn't press for details. This, too, was new. A willingness to surrender control, to follow rather than lead, to trust in her plans for them. An hour later, they were driving along the winding road that led to Lake Windermere, the small, secluded body of water where their story had begun. Evander hadn't questioned their destination, but as recognition dawned in his eyes, he turned to Laurel with surprise. "The lake house? You rented it?" Laurel nodded, a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. "I thought we could spend our anniversary where it all started. Is that okay?" Evander reached across the console to squeeze her hand. "It's perfect." The cabin looked much as it had 10 years ago. A rustic, two-bedroom structure with a wide porch overlooking the lake. Maeve had been there earlier, leaving a basket of food and wine on the kitchen counter and arranging flowers in simple glass vases throughout the space. "This is amazing," Evander said, taking in the familiar surroundings. "Do you remember that first weekend? The bonfire on the beach?" Laurel smiled, unpacking their overnight bags. "I remember you trying to impress me with your guitar playing and failing miserably." "Hey, Wonderwall is a classic," he protested, laughing. "It was terrible," she countered, "but I found it endearing. That's when I knew I was in trouble." They spent the afternoon walking the lakeshore path, reminiscing about their early days together, carefully avoiding the heavier topics that had dominated their conversations for weeks. It felt good to remember the foundation they had built, the love that had withstood not just the normal tests of a decade-long marriage, but the extraordinary challenge of betrayal and forgiveness. As evening approached, Laurel led Evander back to the cabin, where she had prepared a simple dinner of all his favorite foods. They ate on the porch, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, casting the lake in shades of gold and amber. "I have something else for you," Laurel said as they finished their meal. She retrieved a small box from her bag and handed it to him. Inside was a slim silver bracelet, inscribed with a single word, "Together." "It's beautiful," Evander said, running his finger over the engraving. "Turn it over," Laurel instructed softly. On the inside of the band was a date, not their wedding date, as might be expected, but the date of his final cancer treatment. "The day you truly came back to me," Laurel explained. "Not just physically, but emotionally. The day we started being honest with each other again." Evander's eyes filled with tears as he slipped the bracelet onto his wrist. "I don't deserve you." "It's not about deserving," Laurel reminded him, echoing words she had spoken weeks earlier. "It's about choosing. And I choose you, Evander. Every day, I choose you." The sun had nearly reached the horizon now, the sky painted in dramatic strokes of pink and purple. Laurel stood and held out her hand. "Come with me. There's one more surprise." She led him down to the small private beach below the cabin. There, arranged in a circle, were dozens of flickering candles and a blanket spread on the sand. In the center of the blanket lay 2 sealed envelopes. "What is this?" Evander asked, his voice hushed. "Sit with me," Laurel said, leading him to the blanket. When they were settled, she handed him one of the envelopes with his name written on it. "These are new vows, not to replace our original ones, but to add to them, to acknowledge what we've been through and what we've learned." Evander took the envelope, visibly moved. "You want to renew our vows?" "In our own way," Laurel confirmed. "Just the 2 of us. No audience, no performance. Just truth between us." They opened their envelopes simultaneously, each finding a card written in the other's handwriting. "You first," Laurel whispered. Evander cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion, as he read the words Laurel had written. "Evander, I vow to truly see you, not just the version of yourself you want to show me, but all of you, your strength and your weakness, your courage and your fear. I vow to create a marriage where honesty feels safer than protection, where vulnerability is met with compassion rather than judgment. I vow to remember that love is not just a feeling, but a daily choice, and I choose you today and every day, in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow, in truth and in reconciliation. Whatever lies ahead, we face it together." Tears streamed down Evander's face as he finished reading. He took a moment to compose himself before looking up at Laurel. "Your turn," he said softly. Laurel unfolded the card containing Evander's vows to her, her heart pounding as she began to read aloud. "Laurel, I vow to never again let fear drive me away from you. I vow to trust in your strength as much as I trust in my own. I vow to share my burdens with you, knowing that together we can carry what would crush either of us alone. I vow to embrace each day we are given as the gift it is, never taking our time together for granted. And I vow to love you completely, honestly, and fearlessly for whatever days we have left, be they few or many. You are my miracle, Laurel, far greater than any medical remission. You are the healing I never dared hope for." By the time she finished reading, Laurel was crying too, the words blurring on the page. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the distant call of a night bird. "I mean every word," Evander said finally. "So do I," Laurel replied. He reached for her then, pulling her into his arms, and they held each other as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared above the lake. Later, as they lay on the blanket gazing up at the night sky, Evander traced patterns on Laurel's palm with his fingertip. "Do you remember the weekend we met? How we stayed up all night on this beach watching for shooting stars?" Laurel smiled at the memory. "You claimed you saw 7. I only saw 2. I might have exaggerated to impress you," he admitted with a chuckle. "I knew it," Laurel laughed, then grew more serious. "I fell in love with you that night, you know. When you told me about your childhood dream of being an astronaut and how crushed you were when you learned your eyesight wasn't good enough for NASA." Evander looked surprised. "You never told me that." "There are probably a lot of things we've never told each other," Laurel mused, "even before everything." "Then let's start now," Evander suggested. "No more secrets, big or small." They spent the next hours talking as they hadn't in years, sharing forgotten memories, long-held insecurities, dreams that had been set aside, hopes for the future. When the conversation finally turned to Evander's illness, it felt natural rather than forced. a part of their shared history, rather than a wedge between them. "I'm still afraid sometimes," he admitted, "that it will come back, that next time the treatments won't work." "I know," Laurel said. "I'm afraid too, but whatever happens, I'm grateful for right now, for this moment, for you." The first light of dawn was touching the eastern sky when they finally returned to the cabin, exhausted but lighter somehow, as if the weight of unspoken fears and secret histories had been lifted from them both. As Laurel drifted toward sleep in the familiar comfort of Evander's arms, she realized something profound. The renewal they had created wasn't about erasing the pain of the past or pretending it hadn't happened. It was about acknowledging the fractures and choosing to love anyway, choosing to rebuild something stronger at the broken places. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Laurel sat in Dr. Hawthorne's waiting room, her leg bouncing nervously as she checked the time for the third time in 5 minutes. Evander's appointment had started 30 minutes ago, longer than usual for a routine follow-up. The door to the consultation room remained firmly closed. Just as Laurel was considering asking the receptionist for an update, the door opened and Evander emerged, followed by Dr. Hawthorne. Laurel stood quickly, scanning their faces for any sign of the news. Evander's expression was unreadable, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Laurel," Dr. Hawthorne greeted her warmly. "Would you join us, please? Evander and I were just discussing his latest results." With a growing sense of dread, Laurel followed them back into the consultation room. Had the cancer returned? Was this the beginning of another battle? One they would face together this time, but no less terrifying for that. Dr. Hawthorne gestured for them both to sit, then took her own seat behind the desk. "As I was telling Evander," she began, "his latest scans and blood work show absolutely no evidence of disease. It's been 1 year since his last treatment, and all indicators remain perfectly normal." Laurel exhaled sharply, relief washing over her. "That's wonderful news." "It is," Dr. Hawthorne agreed. "In fact, given the consistent results over the past year and Evander's excellent overall health, I'm recommending we move to a 6-month monitoring schedule rather than quarterly." The significance of this change wasn't lost on either of them. It represented another step toward normalcy, another milestone in Evander's recovery. "Does this mean?" Laurel hesitated, afraid to voice the question. Dr. Hawthorne seemed to understand what she was asking. In medicine, we're cautious about using the word cured, especially with aggressive cancers like pancreatic. But I can tell you this: Evander's response to treatment has been remarkable. Each month of clean scans significantly decreases the likelihood of recurrence. At this point, I'm cautiously very optimistic about his long-term prognosis. Evander reached for Laurel's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Dr. Hawthorne and I were discussing plans for the future," he said, his voice steady but his eyes bright with emotion. "Plans that extend well beyond the next 6 months." After reviewing medication adjustments and scheduling the next appointment, they thanked Dr. Hawthorne and left the hospital, stepping into the brilliant autumn sunshine. The world seemed sharper somehow, more vivid, the blue of the sky more intense, the rustle of falling leaves more musical. "So," Laurel said as they walked to their car, "plans for the future?" Evander smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and erased the worry lines that had become so familiar. "I think it's time to revisit that trip to Maine we were planning, before everything happened. Maybe for next summer?" "I'd like that," Laurel agreed. "Anything else?" He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Actually, yes. I've been thinking about something for a while now, but I wanted to wait until after this appointment." He took a deep breath. "What would you think about trying for a baby?" The question took Laurel completely by surprise. They had discussed having children early in their marriage, but had eventually decided their careers and lifestyle weren't conducive to parenthood. Then, with Evander's diagnosis, the idea had seemed impossible. "A baby?" she repeated, her mind racing. "But I thought..." with the treatments. I asked Dr. Hawthorne about that today. Evander explained. She says, while some cancer treatments can affect fertility, my particular protocol shouldn't have caused permanent damage, and all my tests indicate normal function. He squeezed her hands gently. I know it's a big decision. I'm not asking for an answer right now. Just think about it. Laurel studied his face, the face she had loved through health and illness, through deception and truth, through fear and hope. At 36, she had assumed the window for motherhood had closed, especially after Evander's illness. But now, standing in the autumn sunlight, with the promise of a future stretching before them, the possibility reawakened with unexpected force. Yes, she said, the word escaping before she had fully processed her own thoughts. Evander blinked in surprise. Yes? You'll think about it. Yes, Laurel repeated, more certain now. Yes, let's try for a baby. Let's create something new together. The joy that bloomed across Evander's face was like sunrise after the longest night, gradual at first, then radiant, transforming his entire being. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that drew smiles from passers-by. Are you sure? He asked, when he finally set her down. It would change everything. Everything has already changed, Laurel pointed out. We're not the same people we were before your diagnosis. Maybe this is part of who we're becoming now. As they drove home, plans and possibilities unfurled between them. Nursery colors, name ideas, hopes for this hypothetical child who might someday exist. It was the first time in nearly 2 years that they had spoken of the future without the shadow of cancer tempering their optimism. That evening, as they sat on their back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues, Evander pulled out the journal he had kept during his illness, the one he had given Laurel on their anniversary. She had been reading it slowly, one entry at a time, absorbing his experience at a pace she could manage emotionally. There's an entry I'd like you to read, he said, opening to a page marked with a ribbon. I wrote this on the day I received my first clear scan. Laurel took the journal, her eyes falling on the date, 9 months ago, when she had still been completely unaware of his illness. She began to read. Today, for the first time since my diagnosis, I allowed myself to imagine a future, not just next week or next month, but years from now. Dr. Hawthorne cautioned against too much optimism, but there was something in her eyes when she showed me the scan, a brightness I haven't seen before. I found myself thinking about things I'd long since abandoned, traveling with Laurel to places we've always talked about, maybe even revisiting the conversation about children. I've been living in a state of suspended animation, unable to plan beyond the next treatment. But today, sitting in that sterile consultation room, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again. Hope, not just for survival, but for life, for joy. For all the ordinary miracles I'd stopped believing were possible for us. Tears blurred Laurel's vision as she finished reading. She closed the journal gently and returned it to Evander. You never stopped loving me, she said softly, even when you were keeping secrets, even when you were preparing to leave me through divorce to protect me. You never stopped loving me. Never, Evander agreed, not for a single moment. In that instant, Laurel felt the last remnants of hurt and betrayal dissolve, replaced by a profound understanding. The deception had been wrong. There was no changing that fact. But it had come from a place of desperate love, misguided, but genuine. And in the end, that same love had brought them back together, stronger and wiser than before. She moved from her chair to sit beside Evander on the porch swing, nestling against his side as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. His arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close in a gesture both familiar and newly precious. "What are you thinking?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Laurel smiled, her hand finding his where it rested on her shoulder. Their fingers intertwined naturally, the silver bracelet on his wrist, catching the last light of day. I'm thinking about how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best, she said. How what looks like an ending can become a beginning. Evander's arm tightened around her. A new beginning, he agreed, for all three of us. Laurel placed her free hand on her stomach, wondering if someday soon a new life might be growing there, a testament to second chances and the resilience of love that refuses to be defeated, even by the greatest of challenges. Above them, a shooting star streaked across the twilight sky, a brief, brilliant arc of light against the gathering darkness. Evander and Laurel saw it simultaneously, their shared gasp of wonder followed by soft laughter. "Make a wish," Evander whispered, an echo from their first night together on the beach 10 years earlier. Laurel closed her eyes, but in her heart, she knew there was nothing left to wish for. Everything she needed was already here, the warm solidity of Evander beside her, the promise of tomorrow stretching before them, and the precious knowledge that whatever the future held, they would face it as they should have faced the past, together. Some miracles, Laurel reflected, came in the form of clear scans and remission reports. But the greatest miracle of all was this: love that survives the unspeakable, truth that emerges from deception, and hope that refuses to die even in the darkest night. A miracle named tomorrow. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.